The ice in my glass didn't even have time to melt before the social climate shifted from velvet luxury to a sub-zero freeze. One moment, I was monitoring the gala's rhythm. The next, a manicured hand was pointing toward the service exit. Revenge, much like the finest vintage, is a drink best served with a side of cold, hard paperwork. The air in The Gilded Rose usually smelled of expensive oud and quiet desperation, but tonight it was thick with the scent of a storm. As the lead event strategist, I had spent 6 months orchestrating this anniversary gala. Every orchid was placed with mathematical precision. Every bottle of Cristal was chilled to exactly 46 degrees Fahrenheit. I wasn't just staff. I was the ghost in the machine that made the city's elite feel like gods. I was adjusting a floral centerpiece near the velvet rope of the inner circle when the atmosphere curdled. Evelyn Vance, the wife of the venture capital CEO who funded the club, drifted toward me. Her silk dress trailed behind her like a warning flag. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, her eyes scanning the room for someone more important before they finally snagged on my presence like silk on a nail. "You," she whispered, the word sharp enough to draw blood. "You're cluttering the aesthetic. This section is for patrons, not the help. My husband pays for exclusivity, not to watch the staff play decorator." I offered a professional, practiced smile, the kind that masks the fact that you haven't slept in 48 hours. "Mrs. Vance, I'm just ensuring the lighting levels are consistent for the press photos. I'll be out of your way in a moment." She didn't move. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate sip of her martini, her eyes never leaving mine. "I don't think you understand. I don't want you out of the way in a moment. I want you out of my sight. Now. You're just staff, and frankly, your presence is an eyesore." The room went quiet. The low hum of conversation from the nearby tables died down as socialites leaned in, their diamonds glittering like shark teeth in the dim light. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I kept my voice level. I had more than just a job here. I had a stake in the club's legacy that no one in this room knew about yet. "I have a responsibility to the venue, Mrs. Vance," I said softly. "Your only responsibility is to disappear when I tell you to," she snapped. She reached out, her sharp nails grazing the edge of my ID badge. "Take this off, go to the kitchens, or, better yet, go home. I'll make sure Arthur hears about your insubordination in the morning." The micro-tremor in her hand told me this wasn't about the flowers. It was about power. She needed to feel the weight of her husband's checkbook by crushing someone she deemed beneath her. Little did she know, the foundation she was standing on was far more fragile than she realized. I looked at the badge, the plastic rectangle that granted me access to every high-security corridor and private vault in the building. Then I looked at her. The irony was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it with a nod. I reached up, unclipped the lanyard, and placed it on the marble bistro table between us. "As you wish, Mrs. Vance," I said. "I hope the evening is everything you deserve." I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the polished floor. I didn't head for the kitchens. I walked straight to the coat check, grabbed my trench coat, and stepped out into the cool night air. Behind me, the music continued, but the rhythm was off. The machine was missing its ghost. As I signaled for my driver, I pulled out my phone. I had a single unread email from a boutique law firm in Zurich. The subject line read, "Acquisition finalized. Asset transfer complete." Evelyn thought she was cleaning up the room, but she had just cleared the way for a total renovation. The countdown had begun, and by the time she realized the locks were being changed, she'd be the one standing on the wrong side of the velvet rope. The clock is ticking on the Vance empire, and they don't even hear the alarms yet. The 3 weeks that followed were a masterclass in silent demolition. while Evelyn Vance was busy hosting bridge luncheons and bragging about cleaning up the help at the club. I was sitting in a glass-walled office 3 blocks away, watching her world dissolve into ink and signatures. The Gilded Rose wasn't just a club, it was a debt-ridden masterpiece. Arthur Vance had been using the venue as a shiny distraction to mask a series of disastrous tech investments. To the public, he was a titan. To the bank holding his primary notes, he was a liability. When the opportunity arose to buy the holding company through an anonymous shell corporation, I didn't just jump. I lunged. I spent my afternoons reviewing the club's ledgers. It was worse than I thought. Under Evelyn's influence, the VIP guest list had become a curated collection of her sycophants, while the actual high rollers were being alienated by her ego. She treated the most exclusive establishment in the city like her personal living room, and the staff, my former colleagues, were terrified of her whims. I remembered the way the head waiter's hands had shaken when he spilled a drop of wine near her silk purse. I remembered the janitorial crew being forced to use the service elevator even when the club was empty. She wasn't just a patron, she was a toxin in the ventilation system. By the second week, the legal ink was dry. I now held 51% of the parent company, with an option to buy the remaining 49% if the current management, Arthur, failed to meet specific liquidity requirements. Spoilers. He had already failed them. On the night of my return, the club was hosting a gold and glitter gala. It was the kind of event Evelyn lived for. I arrived at the front entrance, not the service door. I wasn't wearing a badge this time. I was wearing a charcoal gray tailored suit that cost more than Evelyn's monthly Botox budget, and a look of absolute terrifying calm. The doorman, a man named Marcus who had worked there for 10 years, blinked twice when he saw me. "Miss, you're not on the list for tonight. I thought you had moved on." "I did move on, Marcus," I said, offering him a genuine smile. I moved up, checked the updated owner's manifest, top of the digital file. He tapped his tablet, his eyes widening as the screen refreshed. The owner field no longer listed Vance Holdings. It listed Aegis Acquisitions. And beneath that, my name. "Ma'am," he stammered, standing straighter than I'd ever seen him. "My apologies. Please, go right in." I walked through the foyer, the familiar scent of oud and lilies hitting me. The club was packed. In the center of the VIP area, Evelyn was in her element, surrounded by a circle of nodding admirers. She was holding court, gesturing with a champagne flute as she recounted some trivial victory. The moment she spotted me, her face underwent a fascinating transformation, from smug satisfaction to outraged disbelief. She set her glass down with a sharp clack and marched toward the velvet rope, her heels sounding like a firing squad. "You!" she hissed, loud enough for the inner circle to hear. "I thought I made it clear that your services were no longer required. Who let you in? Marcus is going to be fired by midnight." "Actually, Evelyn," I said, stepping over the rope without waiting for her to unclip it, "Marcus is getting a raise. He's the only one here who knows how to read a manifest." She laughed, a shrill, brittle sound. "You've lost your mind. Arthur, come here." "This girl has wandered back in, and she's delusional." Arthur Vance approached, looking haggard. His tie was slightly crooked, and the sweat on his brow wasn't from the heat of the dance floor. He looked at me, then at the folder in my hand, and his face went ash gray. He knew. He had received the legal notice 4 hours ago. "Arthur, tell her," Evelyn demanded, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "Tell her she's just staff, and she needs to leave before I call security." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and utterly delicious. Arthur opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the floor, unable to meet her eyes or mine. I stepped closer to Evelyn, leaning in just enough so she could smell the confidence coming off me. "I'm not the help anymore, Evelyn. I'm the landlord. And your husband? He's just a minority shareholder with a very large debt to my firm. I turned to the head of security, who had appeared at my silent signal. Her membership is revoked, I said clearly. Effective immediately. Please escort Mrs. Vance and her husband to the exit. They can collect their personal belongings from the sidewalk tomorrow morning. The gasps from the inner circle were the only music I needed. Evelyn's mouth hung open, her social armor shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The queen was dead. Long live the owner. Wait, the real takeover's just beginning. Evelyn thought she lost a seat at a table, but she's about to realize she lost the roof over her head. The audit has just begun, and the Gilded Rose was only the first domino in a very long line. What happens when the CEO's wife finds out her husband didn't just lose the club, but signed away their entire lifestyle? The silence in the VIP lounge was so thick you could have carved it with a steak knife. Arthur Vance stood frozen, a man watching his own execution in slow motion, while Evelyn's face shifted from a pale porcelain to a blotchy, frantic crimson. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but the friends she had spent years cultivating were suddenly very interested in the bubbles in their glasses. "Arthur?" she whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment. "Arthur, say something. Tell this girl that she's making a mistake." Arthur finally looked up, but not at her. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had spent 3 weeks staring into an abyss. "It's over, Evie," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the thump of the bass from the dance floor. "The bridge loans, the margin calls, it's all gone. She bought the debt. She owns the Rose. She owns everything." I signaled to the security team. "The exit is that way, Mrs. Vance. Since you were so concerned about the aesthetic of the club, I'm sure you'll appreciate that your current breakdown doesn't quite fit the vibe of my establishment." Evelyn's composure didn't just crack, it disintegrated. She lunged forward, her fingers hooked like talons, but the security guards, men she had belittled for years, stepped in with practiced, stone-faced efficiency. They didn't hurt her, but they held her with a firm finality that told her the era of her untouchability was officially extinct. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the gold-leafed ceiling. "I built the social standing of this place. Without me, this is just a room with expensive booze." "Actually," I replied, picking up the martini glass she had abandoned and handing it to a passing waiter, "without you, it's a business. Under your guidance, this club lost $4 million in revenue because you kept blacklisting the people who actually spend money. You didn't build a legacy, Evelyn. You built a cage. I'm just opening the door." As they were ushered toward the stairs, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. It was a walk of shame performed in front of the very people she had spent years trying to impress. I watched from the balcony as they reached the front doors. The neon sign of the Gilded Rose flickered once, as if acknowledging the change in management. I turned back to the room. The inner circle was still standing there, awkward and expectant. They were waiting to see if the new lion was going to bite. "The bar is open for the next hour, on the house," I announced. "But let's be clear, the rules have changed. We value bank accounts over bloodlines here. If you're here to spend, welcome. If you're here to look down on the staff, there's a taxi waiting outside next to the Vances." A cautious cheer went up, and the tension finally snapped. The music resumed, but it felt different, lighter, faster. I walked toward the back office, the one that used to belong to Arthur. I didn't need a badge to open the door this time. My fingerprint was already programmed into the lock. Inside, the mahogany desk was covered in Arthur's clutter. I sat in the leather chair. It was too big, but I'd grow into it, and pulled a second folder from my briefcase. The club was just the beginning. The Vances owned a penthouse on Fifth Avenue and a summer estate in the Hamptons, both of which were cross-collateralized with the club's debt. I picked up the desk phone and dialed my lead counsel. "It's me," I said, watching the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Start the foreclosure process on the residential properties. I want the eviction notices served by breakfast." Evelyn thought the club was her kingdom, but she's about to find out she's lost the castle, too. The sun hadn't even begun to burn through the morning mist when the first moving truck pulled up to the curb of the Vance penthouse. I watched from the comfort of a black SUV parked across the street, a steaming cup of black coffee in my hand. There was something poetic about the timing. 3 weeks ago, I was being ushered out of a VIP room under the cover of night. Today, the Vances were being ushered out of their lives in the brutal clarity of 8 a.m. The lobby door swung open, and Evelyn emerged. She wasn't wearing silk or diamonds today. She was in a frantic, mismatched tracksuit, her hair a bird's nest of blonde strands, clutching a designer vanity case like it held the remains of her soul. Behind her, Arthur looked like a ghost of a man, carrying 2 heavy suitcases that seemed to weigh more than his entire future. A man in a sharp suit, my process server, stepped forward and handed them a final stack of documents. Even from the street, I could see Evelyn's hands shaking as she took them. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the high-rise glass. "We have a grace period. We have rights." "You had rights, Mrs. Vance," the server replied with the robotic calm I had paid him for. Until the default was triggered by the change in ownership at the holding company. Per the contract your husband signed, the residency was tied to the corporate assets. No company, no penthouse. I tapped on the glass of my window, and my driver pulled the car forward, stopping exactly in front of them. I rolled down the window just a few inches. The cool morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp pavement and Evelyn's expensive, fading perfume. She froze when she saw me. For a moment, the old Evelyn tried to resurface, the one who sneered at the help, but the fire died out the moment her eyes hit the eviction notice, stamped in red on the papers in her hand. "You," she breathed, the word sounding more like a prayer than a curse. "Me," I agreed. "I noticed you left your jewelry collection in the safe. Don't worry, it's being cataloged. It'll be sold at auction to cover the outstanding staff bonuses you forgot to pay over the last quarter." "That jewelry is my inheritance," she screamed, taking a step toward the car. "Actually, it was purchased with company funds," I corrected, leaning back into the leather seat. "Which means it belongs to the company, which means it belongs to me." I looked at Arthur, who was staring at his shoes. He knew the math. He had gambled with house money, and the house had finally decided to collect. "I'd offer you a ride, Evelyn, but I'm afraid the interior of this car is for owners only. You understand, don't you? It's all about the aesthetic." I signaled the driver to move. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Evelyn was standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by the cardboard boxes of her former life, while the doorman, a man she had never once thanked, watched her with a look of profound indifference. The machine wasn't missing its ghost anymore. The ghost had taken over the factory. The Vance name was being scrubbed from the city's directories, but I wasn't done yet. There was one more debt to collect. The final debt wasn't financial. It was a matter of professional hygiene. By noon, I was back at the Gilded Rose, but the atmosphere had shifted. The heavy, oppressive tension of the Vance era had evaporated, replaced by a frantic, electric energy. I walked through the main lounge, where a crew was already removing the oversized, gilded portraits of Evelyn that had hung like shrines in the hallways. "Take them to the basement," I told the foreman. "Actually, take them to the dumpster. We need the space for something that actually has value." I called a mandatory meeting in the ballroom. The entire staff, from the executive chefs to the night shift cleaning crew, gathered in a semicircle. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and guardedness. They had seen me take down a titan, and they weren't sure if I was a savior or a new, more efficient monster. 3 weeks ago, I began, my voice carrying without a microphone. I was told I was just staff. Today, I am the owner. But here's the truth. Just staff is what kept this place from collapsing while the Vances were busy bleeding it dry. You are the ones who know which floorboards creak and which regulars prefer their gin with a twist of lime. I paused, letting the words sink in. The first order of business. Everyone is getting a 20% pay increase, effective immediately, funded by the liquidation of the Vance's private wine cellar. The second order, the inner circle is being disbanded. From now on, the VIP area is reserved for people who treat this team with respect, not just those with the biggest credit lines. A stunned silence broke into a roar of applause. I saw Marcus, the doorman, wipe a stray tear from his eye. For the first time in years, the people who built the Rose felt like they actually owned a piece of it. That evening, I sat alone at the bar, the same bar where I had been humiliated. I poured myself a glass of the vintage Evelyn had loved so much, watching the light catch the deep crimson liquid. My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. Vance and his wife have checked into a budget motel near the airport. No assets remaining. Press release regarding the new management goes live in 10 minutes. I looked at the glass, then at the empty space where Evelyn's portrait used to hang. I didn't feel the surge of spiteful joy I expected. Instead, I felt a profound sense of balance. The help hadn't just cleaned the room. We had reclaimed it. I took a single sip, set the glass down, and stood up. I had an empire to run, and for once, the aesthetic was exactly the way I wanted it. I wasn't a ghost in the machine anymore. I was the architect, and the foundation was finally beautifully solid. The rose was finally in bloom.